Hey there, I'm Double D, and welcome to a presentation I've constructed based on the experience of angrily shaking my fist at a video game. So, I haven't had much to do while sitting in group finder queues. I figured, why not hit them with some feedback? So, aptly titled Mythic Plus Feedback, Features, Frustrations, and Futures, I hope this presentation hits you with some takes that seem sane, or proposed changes that seem reasonable, and at least a couple jokes that seem funny. And to the 6 of you who are going to watch this whole thing throughout, thank you, I really appreciate it, and hopefully you'll rally behind me in requesting changes to this system so that we can all just have more fun. That is, if you haven't been sent into a PTSD-induced coma by the end of it because we're looking at a slideshow like a bunch of toddlers. So starting off, I want to start with the acknowledgements. Say thank you, because I couldn't have made this without a few key individuals. Couldn't have made it with the same passive-aggressive energy as a cashier on their 10-minute break. So I want to start with Blizzard for making a fun and engaging combat experience that I want to push to its limits alongside other players, while simultaneously manufacturing punishments to that experience that make me want to kill those very same players. And secondly, the fellow content creators. You're out there fighting the good fight. We are not going to agree on all the same solutions, but I think we can commiserate in feeling a lot of the same problems. And finally, the pugs that I have played with these past few weeks, thank you for achieving with me. You've suffered with me, but most importantly, more often than not, you have absolutely fucked me. So thank you for that. Excellent work. Great job. A brief overview. What are we going to cover? All right, starting off, we're going to start with a short background on the system and myself, just to give some context and perspective to where I'm coming from and how I'm engaging with it. Then we're going to move into the specific player or group pain points, specifically in relation to Blizzard's recent changes, like the tank changes, stops, CCs, things like that. And then we're going to move into the system pain points, things like affixes, key difficulty scaling, the rewards you get, and my personal favorite, key depletion. And then I'll wrap it all up at the end in a nice little bow and hopefully not come across like a complete fucking asshole. Because despite this wall of shit, I like the game. I just think it could do some tweaks. Like big tweaks. Like, please stop raw dogging me and 90% of my runs tweaks. And as we move into the pain points, I'm going to take a what is it, why is it frustrating, and what are the options going forward approach. If you're reacting to this later, you'll have plenty of time to pause and say how dumb I am, I promise. So, breezing through this background on Mythic Plus as a whole. It's focused on repeatable, timed dungeons, 5-man end-game group content that's accessible by players with varying skill levels, or if you're a player in one of my groups, no skill at all. The dungeons are accessed via a keystone that's given to players, and this keystone is what goes up or down depending on if you time the dungeon or not. The dungeons available in any given season are rotated out with each major patch cycle of the game so that Blizzard can make sure that we remember how bad some of the shit is that they've made before. Grim but told. Enough said. And then, the dungeons are infinitely scaling content, meaning that you can climb difficulty levels of all the different dungeons as high as you can manage. The dungeons gain affixes, increasing their difficulty further, like increased mob health and damage, or additional mechanics, so that limiting factors are your gear, your group composition, or your brain cells, the last of which I'm losing rapidly. And the rewards scale up to a certain point, giving you end-of-dungeon loot that increases the higher level dungeon that you complete. And then finally, this system has seen a ton of changes going into this latest expansion, from difficulty level compression, player role adjustments, and reward structure. So we're going to touch on all those things. So, a little background on me. I've been a long-time player of the game since its original release, every expansion since, every version since, and I've played at varying levels both casually or progression-oriented. Typically, I blaze through the content in the beginning, digesting everything the expansion has to offer before I ultimately just end up raid logging, focusing on that, and getting power gains wherever I can, just to juice up my one character that I play per expansion. So historically, I've been a tank player. I lean into trying to live shit that I shouldn't, and in the past this helped me lead raids or groups of friends easier, but I've since just taken on a backseat and I'm just gaming. Which is great because when I was leading for my friends, I've never hated them more. And until this expansion, I've always been a raid-first focused player, with the past two expansions being focused on cutting edge, only ever dipping into other in-game content for rewards to get power gains, to take back to raids, like getting enough Mythic Plus rating for a curio, or getting enough PvP rating for a weapon, grinding out whatever it took just to squeeze out a little bit more power. Recently, though, I have become entrenched in the Mythic Plus in-game pillar. I started off the season like any other, just doing enough to get a curio, just doing enough to get a little bit of a reward, until a few weeks ago, I started to dip my toes into the more aspirational goals that it offers. I became deeply familiar with the pitfalls of the everyday pugging experience, and after being sent into the stratosphere of being pissed off about that experience, I made a video about it. And then after receiving a bunch of comments referencing how it was a skill issue, I doubled down and I started pushing even higher. Until finally now I'm at the point where I am just slightly shy of title range. All of this done through solo pugging, mostly. Maybe with a friend or two at times, sitting in Group Finder, hitting refresh, and praying someone takes me to their run when it's one of the last ones I need for the next threshold. Now, hopefully this gives some perspective going forward on the problems that I'm going to illuminate within the system. And I'll mention it here again. I like the gameplay loop. I like challenging content that requires skill and pushing performance. I like those aspects. I wouldn't just propel myself towards Mythic title in the middle of a season solely out of spite. Just like I wouldn't push cutting edge and deal with my brain-dead co-tank Jesse if I didn't enjoy it. I'll even do it if the rewards are kind of shit or don't even exist. These criticisms just come from a place to make it hopefully feel more fun. Within reason, I know fun is subjective, but I'm largely a fun-first gamer. Imagine, playing a game for fun. Novel concept, I know. Okay, so getting into the weeds here. I'd like to start off the pain points talking about something relevant to me and my usual role, the tank changes. I say usual because in this season, it's no longer the case. I have fully moved over to just doing DPS when I'm pushing keys, which isn't surprising given the litany of shit that has been made to make it extremely frustrating and punishing to get into or to have to deal with. There's more reach to this than just Dungeons 2. I still tank and raid. We're working on Mythic Queen right now, but I just don't really want to touch it when it comes to Dungeons. And the reason for that is because of a lot of the changes that Blizzard made going into this expansion. So let's talk about those changes. So tanks will take more damage overall, but shouldn't die significantly more often. Well, that's halfway there. Tanks certainly do take more damage, so much more in fact, that it ruins the second half of this bullet point. Because brother, let me tell you, there, across all the keys that I have run on my Death Knight, I have spent more battle reses on tanks than anyone else, and it's not even close. Most of the time, even when they do get back up, it's probably fucked anyway, because trying to recover with 0 buffs or mitigation up after dying is next to impossible depending on the class, and especially if anyone else flopped as a result of it. I'm not just talking about 12s and up either. This was noticeable even in the lower ranges when I was farming shit early on. So next, tank damage intake should be steady and not too fast. Well, we just covered that they die a lot, and that really only happens one way most of the time, quickly. If you've ever done a Grim Batol, a Stone Vault, or any large dungeon pull that you probably press Lust on for that matter, you will see that tanks get hit hard, fast. Their health bar disappears almost instantaneously. It is aggressive. When I first started tanking on my Death Knight this season, I would walk up to a pack and just get immediately chunked for most of my health in unavoidable damage. Now I know blood DKs in general have this problem where once the key is high enough, you're just trying to start a pull and you just flop on the opener. But this isn't like 18s. This isn't 16s. I'm doing 10s. 10s, and I'm familiar with hard-hitting shit coming from the Mythic Raid background. I know Raid is different. It feels a lot fucking better. But It's not just me. Most of my tanks, like others, have been prot paladins or prot warriors early in the season, and they seem to suffer the same fate pretty often. So next, the tanks will have strong answers to threats or periods of damage, but less sustained self-healing. Partial truths again, tanks do have several different cooldowns for different situations and less sustain, but man, the whole dungeon feels like a period of danger. I feel like I could have 8 cooldowns and I'd still be rotating every one of the damn things to live some of the trash mobs in a dungeon. On top of having less sustain, which, who doesn't love taking their responsibility and offloading it to another role to deal with? I don't. I don't love that. And I'm willing to bet they don't love it either, given they're already trying to heal the 3 other smooth brains in our party. So next, healer gameplay should not be dominated by tank healing. They're healers, who cares? I'm kidding, but judging by how often I see the other DPSers caught lacking, I'd say they're plenty busy with other shit already. Plus, gameplay isn't really tank healing if the tank dies before a heal can go off, I guess. So it's probably dominated more by running for their life. So next up, tank gameplay should not significantly change or require actions like kiting to survive. Gameplay, you know what, I'd say it's mostly the same, yeah. You spend more time on the floor, but you know, the button presses are largely similar. Now kiting to survive, little late for that because people are already doing it. Nothing says armored brick shithouse like running away. I don't get it. And finally, they asked a series of questions at the end. The feedback. We can hit these pretty quick because I've already put some feelers out there. How durable do you feel before and after the changes? What make you feel that difference? I feel considerably squishier. Yeah, and what makes me feel it is getting punched in the fucking mouth by white hits for half my health bar and damage every second. In what ways did you change how you play? I stopped tanking. How did it change your builds? I play a different spec. In what scenarios were you getting into trouble? Somewhere between when the key went in and the group disbanded. For healers, how much of your attention went to tanks compared to before? Well, I'm not a healer, but Battle Resin does give them life back, and it's happening more often, I'd say. So those are the changes and the frustrations that I've felt with it, but what about going forward? Where do we go from here? What do we do about it? We have to go back. I honestly think that rewinding time is the best path forward. Call up Chromie, tell her this ain't it, Chief, and let's hit the drawing board again. Because coming from a tank player's perspective and seeing how the rest of the community has felt about this, the state of tanking is anti-fun. It's not fun to get two-shot by autos. It's not fun to carry massive weights of key success on weak little shoulders. And it's not fun to have your agency taken away from you. I didn't ask for it, and I really don't think anyone else did either. I understand no one is ever going to advocate for themselves to be weaker. I get it. But the list of changes have either outright failed their goal at worst or been annoying at best. Not only that, I'd go so far as to say tanks should be buffed after 180ing these changes due to the compounding effects of other parts of the system that have been adjusted. We've been dealt a shitty hand, and then you took away half our chips to play with. I think back to Season 3 of Dragonflight when I was tanking Farak, and we got to the last phase, and I could just eat every single tank buster until the boss died. That shit had me bricked. And not every tank should be able to do that, and not every pull has to feel that way, sure, but the closer we get towards that end of the spectrum, and the further away we get from running away because we're scared the auto attacks might hurt, that's gotta be for the better. So next, I want to touch on the CC portion of dungeons being kicks and stops. So Blizzard tried to make some changes to the way stops function going into the War Within. That being stops like AoE stuns, knockups, disorients, those type of things. They don't put mob spells that they're currently casting on cooldown. So if you disrupt them, they'll go back to casting it. Before, they'd come out and think, damn, I really wish I could cast Arcing Void again, and instead now they come out and say, damn, I'm going to cast Arcing Void again. And my buddy is too, so we're about to bang bros this whole group. Good game, get fucked, you idiots. And I actually believe that this has had the inverse effect on groups, whereby making AoE CC less valuable, you now just try to get more of it out of your same group composition, so that you can keep doing big pulls and timing keys. Which brings me to my first point. There's so much to kick and so little time. People want to pull big and do big damage, but you're constantly under the gun of tons of different packs in these dungeons, having casts that are brutal if they go off, even basic spells. Some of them you can't even kick. You get focused by two of them at the same time, and you'll just flop over. If you spend more time looking at nameplates and mind melding with your group so that you don't overlap CCs and interrupts, it's more frustrating than anything. Secondly, stops don't stop. They just delay, and delays suck. Next, interrupting the player. I gotta say, there's not many things as annoying as being juiced up on CDs, lust, and TRT, and having to grip in a mob, or kick one so it moves, or call stop rotations. It's happening too much. Those things on their own, sure, they're okay, but it's all the fucking time. Mobs hate being interrupted, and god damn it, so do I. The only difference is they aren't real people. Seriously. They're not playing the game. They're the NPCs. We don't gotta balance the game for them to feel strong, I promise. I know some of my group mates might seem like bots, but they're breathing. I think, kinda. Heavily, probably. These changes seem geared towards pushing players to coordinate more and communicate interrupts and CCs in static groups, which is understandable, but to that I say, calm this, dude. Most people don't wanna. They just don't. Pings and stuff, sure. Voice line wheels one day, okay. Hopping in a channel to hear their vacuum cleaner running, dogs barking, no, I don't wanna. Also, for the first few runs that I have hopped in Discord for, it's not like it magically solved the problem. Every one of those runs got bricked too. Most of them within the first pool. Now that's anecdotal evidence, I know, but all of my top runs have been no voice. And so I'm okay with doing no voice. In fact, when I'm browsing Group Finder and I see someone say Discord, or I hop in a group and they post a link in chat, immediately I think, fuck, is anyone else running right now? So what direction should we head in? Certainly having zero interrupts and no mechanics to deal with at all is not the answer. I'm not advocating for an all or nothing approach. But in this case, I think less is more. Simple equation. So simple, there's not even any numbers in it. Less group wiping casts across the board, the more you can group mobs and kill shit. Less AoE stops needed for big pulls, the more you can focus on blowing things up. The less disruptive mobs are to players, the more they get to do the fun part of their class. Less talking, more hitting. Simple equation. Now I understand variety is the spice of life, so it can't all just be big AoE pull, boss, big AoE pull, boss. But that just means maybe we should do, a big AoE pull, bigger AoE pull, then boss. I'm joking, but seemingly the intention so far has been to punish the player kits and buff mob capabilities so groups ultimately pull smaller and eke out every bit of coordinated CC that they've got. And if that's the case, then buddy, I guess just mark everything at the start of the dungeon and put up invisible walls so that you can't grab more packs. Does that sound shitty to you? Yeah, it does to me too. So let's go in the opposite direction for a change. Let's try having the mitigating factor be if we can kill all this stuff fast enough to time the key. Not the only metric, but a larger emphasis on doing the cool part. Plus it'd be nice to blame DPS for DPS instead of just miss kicks. So moving on to group composition, I know this is something that's complained about a ton, mostly because WoW has so many specs and only 5 slots to fill when it comes to dungeons. So it's much more contested as you push higher, and it's something that is heavily influenced by the top end that has trickled down into the pug territory, even in places where it doesn't matter. Much more so than raids, for example, especially because the content is infinitely scaling, and there's a sweet spot where the content can be super difficult and meta comps can make it easier, even if it's not top-end content. A meta will always exist. I get it. If you make it more about damage, well then the meta is just what does the most damage. Even though I personally think it's cooler to get hyped up about the damage that a class or a player can do rather than how many defensives they have, it still elicits a similar response. But one thing in particular I'll point out, which they have recently, very recently, yesterday, made some slight adjustments to this to make it not so taxing on players, is the debuffs. Debuffs that players encounter throughout dungeons are rough as hell, to the point where it can feel impossible should you play outside the meta for a certain dungeon. It's one thing to have not as many tools as another spec, but to have 0 tools as other specs within your same role is brutal. And because stops, interrupts, cleanses, and CCs in general are so valuable, bringing classes that have those capabilities for free or really low investments in their trees gives you more bang for your buck. So much so that some of these dungeons, they just shove you towards one direction right out the gate when it comes to making your group. And so if there's always going to be a meta, is there even anything to change here? And I think so. And in fact, it looks like they know too. If we're strictly talking about people completing 18s and higher, you know what? They're going to figure it out. They're going to find out what works best. But in general, I think adjustments are needed and should be geared towards more classes having perks for certain dungeons rather than feeling like an outright necessity. So going forward, I think it'd be better to adjust debuffs to not be the end-all be-all, closer to nice to have rather than necessary, especially considering how many specs there are in the game and how niche some of the effects feel to have to deal with. I'd just like the answer to be, we made the mobs more susceptible or toned down these casts instead of we made this class shittier so you won't care if they don't come as much. I think that's the better answer, and it looks like they might be heading in that direction. Of course, all these pain points tie together to make a recipe for having your back blown out regularly by basic mechanics of the dungeon. And I really think any of these things has a significant impact on its own, and the group finder has suffered greatly for it, or at least that's how it feels currently. And it's not any one key level's problem. Sure, top-end players will have specific problems that they have to solve that require an exact composition to overcome. But across the board, 7s, 10s, 12s, 15s, these problems are present. Get it? Because there's a present on the... Okay, anyway. Performance, gear level, and skill ceilings, they kind of lend themselves to the key level that's being attempted, right? So these problems follow suit to those players' abilities. Tanks flopping over? Yup. Feeling like you got 3 cycles of stops to coordinate and kick so that you can do juicy pulls? You bet. Are you gatekeeping compositions when we're not even close to needing to min-max? They absolutely are. I know when 3,300 players go and clear 10s for the week to get their box, they stomp through it like it's nothing, but that just isn't the experience for most of the other players. And due to any number of factors, that may never be an option for them. I'm not saying everyone should be able to do 16s. Limits are limits. I think the closer those limits get to, damn, we couldn't time this because we didn't blast hard enough, the better, instead of, whoops, tank death, whoops, only have 1 decurse, whoops, 3 alloy bolts went off on the same guy and he just ate shit. And those limits seem to be affecting a ton of players at different stages. I'm also not advocating for every class to be able to do everything. I don't think homogenization is the answer. I don't think giving every healer, every dispel, or every DPS the same damage profile, or every tank the same kick capabilities is the solution. I think the dependency on bringing specific utilities should not be the threshold of making or breaking it. I know this is a tightrope to walk, but does it have to be? And that's coming from someone who ended up unintentionally playing a spec people do invite. Even if certain debuffs or unstoppable casts were straight up removed from some of these dungeons, they'd still be difficult content. And that difficulty spikes really hard. And that goes into my last point. These changes all tie together into a compounding problem. Any one of these pain points on their own adds friction to the system, but when they're married together, it just forms an abusive little family that sells your Christmas presents for Bud Heavies and cigarettes. It really fucking sucks. Even beyond the player or role-centric issues, the system as a whole lends itself to being increasingly frustrating on top of that for players already suffering. So starting off our system pain points are affixes. Should come as no surprise, as this is one of the major reworks the system got between the last expansion and this one. While affixes are meant to further increase difficulty as you climb higher through keys, there's two standouts. One, Challenger's Peril. Every time someone dies, that's 15 seconds penalty to your timer, and you can quickly see how punishing this can become when it's coupled with some of the other problems that we went over. Did your tank just walk in and get body bagged? That's 15 seconds, and most likely soon to be more when you try to recover from it. And even more if that recovery fails. And even more if you died during big cooldown bursts. And even more still if you're in one of the shittier dungeons with long runbacks. But hey, to compensate for this, Blizzard added 90 seconds to all the dungeon timers. Great. I'm drowning and you gave me a high five. The next is Xal'atath's Bargains, or Xal'atath's Guile. Below a 12 key, bargains add additional mechanics that hopefully you can just make your healer do, but unfortunately don't always work that way. So soaking orbs, cleansing debuffs, funneling a mob, or CCing mobs are all the nifty little party tricks that she asks you to do. Also, a quick shout out, I think it's pretty funny how the CC orbs one is so expansive for how it can be handled, but then that logic is seemingly reversed for mobs and dungeons. They're just the less limited, less punishing version of shitty trash mobs. They've got something that you really need to take care of, but you got a lot of tools to take care of it. Amazing. It's like we came so close, but we just haven't made that mental leap yet. Make the mobs the things that aren't super shitty. Anyway, Guile removes these mechanics, instead scaling up mobs even further at 12 and above. And I don't know a single player, a single one, that prefers having these affixes to not. Every person I've played with, friend, guildies, whoever, they would rather run a plus 12 than an 11. Even though it's drastically more difficult, it means you just don't have to deal with the bargain bin bullshit. Is that anecdotal? Yeah, but do I think it's an interesting trend to mission? Of course. So what amazing changes to these affixes should there be? What insane cook do I have hidden up my sleeve? Well, I'm not a goddamn magician, so not much. Challenger's Peril, I think, just needs to be more consistent. I do think less punishing. It's not just the time you lose on deaths, it's the run back, it's the cooldowns. You know the drill. 90 seconds in Grim Batol isn't 90 seconds and miss. And the inconsistency for the cost is so substantial that it pushes you in the direction of not even wanting to try and recover. Because what happens if you do? It's hard to imagine, but what if the tank does die? You're kiting, you battle res them, you're trying to live and get a handle on it, but what if you fail? You might come out worse than if you just all ran into the mobs and died and reset. There's probably single-digit times where I've successfully recovered from pulls. And if the takeaway from that is, yeah, dude, stop trying to recover, that just feels shitty. I don't know. It feels weird to just resign and not try. Deaths should be punishing, sure, but I promise you they are. What you lose in walking, cooldowns, don't worry, I feel properly fucked already. Xal'atath's Bargains should just take a hike, or at least the curse aspect of their Kiss Curse design. Players don't want to deal with affixes, and the less they interact with them, the more they seem to enjoy them. Even to the point that they would rather a 12 over an 11. They would prefer a 20% increase in dick they'll take over running a key that has affixes. And the difficulty spike between 11s and 12s is no joke. It's pretty significant, and even still, they would seemingly prefer to run a 12. And honestly, I don't know if Guile is absolutely necessary on top of that. Further increasing mob health and damage, it just seems, why are we introducing such a huge barrier at that stage? And to those that say the absence of affixes may make it stale, I promise you, go check out Group Finder. Your party members will have plenty of surprises for you, or at least mine do. Jesse. So piggybacking off the affixes, the key difficulty ties right in. Blizzard compressed the number of key levels previously, trimming everything down and reducing the range that affixes are introduced, or the sheer number of levels that you need to reach for similar goals, effectively cutting it substantially. And they also introduced additive difficulty spikes that ramp up quicker. I actually think this was good for the system as a whole, but it's left some clear barriers within the progression. Firstly, if you're someone who comes into the system from a sensical progression path, like say, reaching max level, doing delves, and going into Mythic Plus, what you'll find is coming from Tier 8 delves into equivalent +7 dungeons is a drastic change in difficulty, even though the rewards are logically your next step. I know there's other avenues like normal and heroic raid, but they just aren't as pick up and go as Mythic Plus is. They're not as accessible. So it makes more sense that people want to explore this territory. Additionally, in an infinitely scaling system, instead of letting it naturally fan out the player base, it has some drastic steps in difficulty. The jump between an 11 and 12 is where this is the most noticeable, but breaking through this barrier probably took me longer than the jump from all 13s to all 14s. And the system almost sets you up to get screwed, especially if you're unfamiliar with the difficulty spike, by doing something like, say, 2-chesting a 11 necrotic wake, and it turns into a 13 stonefall. Drastically different experiences. But the system leads you to it as if it's your next logical progression point. This happens at other stages as well, whether it be 6 to 7, 9 to 10, whatever. And you can find yourself being gaslit into thinking that you'll walk into something with a high chance of success when you almost certainly will fail. These really tie in tightly to the affixes since they attribute to these spikes significantly. Similarly, I think key difficulty would benefit from smoothing out the curves and having less surprises. I'm not saying the scaling increments need to be so minuscule that the graph looks closer to a flat line than a ramp up, because all that does is revert it into a system with a lot more steps. But I think there's some leeway here that could favor consistency. And the rewards, which I'll hop into next, I think will play the largest role in the entry point issues that people encounter. And Blizzard has already said as much, identifying the pain points for Delve players that migrate into group play. So they'll probably end up nerfing Delve gear or some dumb shit like that. So moving into rewards, this is something Blizzard already seems intent on adjusting. They know going into the next season, rewards for players entering the system need tweaking, as well as things like crests also need to be changed, which they're adjusting a little bit, but I don't really think it's enough. Because currently, you hit two big problems for new players or new characters or incentivizing groups to even want to finish. The first being item rewards. At the end of a dungeon, the rewards do not correlate to the difficulty of the content that you're tackling. At the low end, it's worse than Delve gear. At the high end, you're doing content that is arguably some of the hardest in the game, especially for 5-mans, yet it rewards gear that will be replaced as soon as you get anything on the myth track. So early on in the season, if you're a Mythic Plus only player or someone who gets gear slowly from Mythic Raid, it takes a long time to fill out your character. That gives more runway to the system, but I also think it doesn't give much incentive to actually finish dungeons. This is extremely unforgiving if you play multiple characters or swap characters at all, since the achievement of 639, which is now being changed to 636, in every slot is miserable to obtain. We're this deep into the season, and I still haven't gotten a single ring. Now, this content is massively repeatable in comparison to things like raids, but the point still stands that the rewards for what you're doing don't really match the pace. even with the updates to no crest cap and knocking down the achievement threshold, it all feels pretty late by this point. And the vault gives Mythic track, yeah, but that's once a week and it might not even be anything that you want. But everyone loves sockets, right? So that's probably fine, right? Crests are awarded at the end of the dungeon as well, and largely become the only item, even worthwhile from the end of the dungeon chest, provided you aren't already capped on them. They recently removed this cap, but again, feels pretty late. Not only that, this reward gets gutted when you fail to time a key, further incentivizing you to just abandon the run. The crest rewards are stingy. If you roll up another character later or re-roll for any reason, crests are a massive cock softener. To stare down the barrel of farming hours and hours of timed dungeons, more if they aren't timed, is honestly unreal, especially in an expansion that has taken massive swings towards being alt-friendly. This is the opposite. So what do we do about the rewards? It's a huge motivator for gameplay for tons of people, so it's safe to say it shouldn't suck. How does it not suck? More. Straight up. On the low end of item rewards, you could put heroic track gear starting at a +2, and I personally wouldn't give a shit. As people enter this in-game pillar, they need incentives that make sense for them. I'm not saying that +2 should be the entry point, but it should probably be lower than what it is now, key level wise, for difficulty. And if the key level goes down, those rewards are going to have to come up to compensate because lower key levels just don't offer you anything. Otherwise, why the hell would I even want to waste time doing them? For everyone else, I'd recommend two things. One or both, but I know having both would be impossible. First, a Boolean or dinar system. Whatever the hell you want to call the 700th currency added to the game. It's a token that buys gear, period. Award me several throughout the season. I don't care. Just give me some stuff that I can target some items. Second, a bounty map system for Mythic Plus. And no, I don't mean how it was implemented in Delves, where you randomly got one or got fucked. I mean, once a week or every 2 weeks, you get a map after completing a key that makes the next dungeon loot you get be a track higher. So if you run a 10 Grim Batol, you use your bounty map before you loot the chest, congrats on your Mythic track loot. This allows you to target a dungeon you want and in a run that you want, whenever you want, getting gear you hopefully want. If you miss a bounty map handout, guess what? They stack and you'll get another one from the next dungeon that you complete, further incentivizing you to stay in the loop and go again to complete a key. Not time, complete a key. For crests, we gotta pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. 20 for a dungeon? Brother, listen to this. Are you listening? You ready? 45. Yeah, you thought, oh, what do you think of Double D? 25, 30, 45, bitch. Even if you failed to time it. Even if you don't time it, give me 45 crests. It's a solid number. Solid number for guns, liquor, and crests. There's 2 dungeons a week to cap you out on 90. That's enough for a box, craft, have some spare change, and if it's coupled with bounty maps, enough to go get a Mythic track gear drop and give it a little juice. On top of that, warbound that shit. You can keep the weekly cap a character can use, that's fine, but let me farm crests on whatever guy I want. If my alt has room for 800 gilded crests, just let me load him up. And when I do, you can lower my cap back down on my main to make room for more. I'm not saying you should be able to hold infinite crests on one guy or use infinite crests, but that limit should be able to be gained from anyone that I play, depending on how I spend or use it. If you don't want me to be able to trade these things around, I guess that's fine, but at least up the gains. Rewards matter, and to some people, they are the only thing that matters. But in the words of Juicy J, bands make her dance. And right now, currently, completing keys is a low bands activity. Okay, so I saved the best for last. Key depletion. The genesis of it all. The reason why I raged into my microphone originally about how I bricked run after run after run when trying to break through the barrier of 11s to 12s. I'll do my best to not be purely pissed off about it, but I make no promises. So a key depletion happens when you fail to time a dungeon run. Although only the person who owns the key and started the dungeon gets fucked by this. And 90% of the time, it means you'll have a lower key for the same exact dungeon that you just attempted, because it only re-rolls into a new dungeon if you complete it. However, if it's not getting timed, it almost certainly is not getting completed, especially as you go higher, since there's nothing to play for other than aspirational goals at that point. It is a punishment designed to keep you in the gameplay loop, knocking you down to mix up maybe who, where, or what you're playing with. Although, in practice, what happens much more often is you keep going down, 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 and down into the depths of Group Finder hell. Like, let's say you get a 15 necrotic wake for the week. Cool, you need necrotic wake for IO, so you decide to run that key. Well, most of the people signing up haven't timed a 15 necrotic wake yet, but they've probably timed another 15. So you build the group, you go in, and it's bricked within the first 5 minutes. Awesome. It's now a 14 necrotic wake, which you do not need for IO, but screw it. You want to run it so you can push it back up, hopefully, so you post it again. Well, most of the people signing up haven't timed a 14 necrotic wake yet, but they've probably timed another 14. So you build the group, you go in, and it's bricked within the first 5 minutes. You see what I'm saying? The cycle goes on and repeats over and over and over again until now you're sitting there staring at your 11 necrotic wake thinking, God damn it, now I have to play with affixes. For some people, running their own key is their only option. If you don't play a meta spec, or you want to get in a run with, an hour, or you want to break the next threshold of dungeon levels, this might be your only reasonable avenue. Not everyone can snag a group for a whole host of reasons, even if you run with a group normally. But you want to play outside those coordinated times, you're pushed to do nothing and hold your key, otherwise you risk tanking it down. Maybe you consider running with some friends or guildies that aren't as high rated as you, but you'd really rather not, because what if they brick your key? That just leaves you worse off than if you'd never played with them at all. And on top of this, this remains a staple of the system at every level, making sure you are forced to suffer over and over again should you take on the responsibility of being the key holder. And it will send you right back into the Shadow Realm to play through shit that isn't even necessary for your next progression point. So imagine your dismay if you're playing a non-meta tank, running your own key, slogging through getting your cheeks clapped every single pull, and someone misses a fear cast and you wipe. The group dissolves, and you're left to do it all over again with hopefully better luck next time. Do you think you want to run it back? Or would you just log off? Do you think you'll see more keys being ran the more people have that experience? I'm pretty sure you can guess what a lot of Group Finder has done. So something has to be changed about this part of the system. I've heard a lot of different suggestions. Keys should have charges, keys should have lives, keys should only deplete if they aren't completed, ratings should go up and down, etc. After listening to what all the community has put out there and mulling it over myself, I've settled on two options. One I'd be okay with and one I'd be happy with. So the first one, the okay one, if depletion remains, I think if you time a key of the same level or higher, your key goes back up. You have a 15 necrotic wake that brick? Okay, so you go run someone else's 14 or 15 and it goes back to a 15. It can even re-roll into a new dungeon too if that jazzes you up. I don't really care. It goes up to +1 level from your highest timed completion of that dungeon. So if you do run it back on your own key and you fail again, your key can still get back somewhere you need it to be for your next aspirational step. The next one, and my preferred option, is selection-based. Similar to Delves, there are no keys. You walk in, you interact with the Font of Power, select the level you want to run. Additionally, at the start of the season, everyone would be able to select anywhere from a +2 to a +10. Past that, they unlock the same way that Delve tiers are unlocked. You do a 10, it unlocks to an 11. Do the 11, it unlocks a 12. So on and so forth. You failed to time it. Oh well, no depletion. You can just attempt another dungeon again. If it makes you feel better, the dungeon can even re-roll whether you time it or not. I know there is a knee-jerk reaction to this, that what if people just fail a pull, walk out, reset, and go again? To that I say, so what? If people want to sweat, let them. Because currently what happens if you fail a pull, you disband, walk out, and go right back to Group Finder, hitting refresh. I do not give a shit. Please let them sweat. You know what sucks a lot more? Spending 4 hours in a queue simulator with nothing to show for it but the rotting 11 key in my bags. It has to change. And you know what? If we try it and it sucks, take it back. Revert it. But this ain't it. So currently, I think the system pain points reflect it not being rewarding enough, having odd spikes in difficulty, inconsistent difficulty, and too severe of punishments baked into it. Similar to the group pain points, I think it's pertinent to say it's a problem at any level. The rewards mismatch across the board and aren't enticing enough. Any dungeon almost feels susceptible to the jarring difficulty spikes, and key depletion raw dogs you whether you're doing 2s or 20s. Punishments feel like overkill. From death penalties to key penalties, I'm already out the time, the consumables, the cooldowns, and the gold I spent ramming my key or someone else's into the dirt. Please do not piss on me while you beat me. Thirdly, you are incentivized to do as much as you can to not fail a key because the punishments are so severe. You take the best classes, the highest IO players, the path of least resistance, because anything other than success is depressing as hell. I think by and large, we should want to move towards fuck it, send it, and get away from, gee, I hope we don't mess up. That's curved back shit. That's that aw geez shit. Get out of here. Our group comp not the best? Not everybody has timed this already? Jesse wants to group up? Fuck it, send it. So to finish us out, I'd like to give just broad strokes for how it should feel. There are what feel like too many barriers for entry due to both the system and group pain points to want to invest time in it, especially for tanks and healers to an extent. It alienates people wanting to enter the play space. If more often than not, it's frustrating, then it won't feel fun for long. The rewards need to be beefed up substantially, especially the crests, since this content is the quickest way to obtain them. If nothing else gets changed at all with rewards, at least bump the numbers up further. The drop rate has to come up. I want to feel the benefits. Please do not spoon feed. Let me go Tusk time. I want to be a hog, please. Finally, the punishments are honestly staggering. Every which way, it feels like the game is asking, are you sure you want to do this? It pushes people to have to mitigate losses rather than queue up and send it. Even if we don't succeed, it'd be nicer to feel like, nice try, we'll get them next time, instead of, wow, my ass is sore. So, finally, I didn't list my references because I'm not a fucking narc, and also it mostly just comes from playing the game. I played it a lot. I have run a ton of keys, the vast majority of which full pugs, like 99%. So keep that in mind before you say, I'm a big dummy. I am a dummy, but I have still thought a lot about this. So thank you for listening. Good luck in your keys, and please delete key depletion and bump up rewards. Thanks.